Have you ever got caught in the shoulda, woulda, couldas? Spending too much time living in that train of thought can lead to feelings of inadequacy, and we can find ourselves on the shame train. So, how do we rewire our thought patterns and align them with our identity in Christ? Let's discuss that in this episode with Robin Blumenthal as we conclude our mini-series on shame. Let's get off the shame train and embrace the identity that God intended for us. In today's episode, Robin says, we want to be so deeply known that shame has no place to hide. And if you're looking for a place to be authentic, to live real life among other authentic women, join us in our private Facebook group, Living the Reclaimed Life. There are some pretty fantastic women on there, including Robin, with a deep desire to live out of the freedom that Jesus came to give us. So let's do it together. We hope to see you there. Now for this episode with Robin Blumenthal. Welcome to Living the Reclaimed Life podcast. I'm Denisha. We're glad you're here for conversations that revive hope, inspire healing, and encourage you to live a vibrant life with Christ. So grab a cup of coffee as we chat with today's guest. Today, we are going to continue our conversation on the topic of shame. And I don't know about you, but this has been a fun month considering we've had a pretty heavy topic. And we're going to continue that conversation today with my friend Robin Blumenthal. And now I'm going to take just a minute before Robin comes on and says hello. And I'm going to brag about her just a little bit. Robin is the reason that I got involved in trauma-informed care. And so we're going to talk about that in a minute. But Robin is a trauma-informed trainer, a parenting coach. Yep, I know. Y'all want her number, right? A speaker and a writer. She also serves in a part-time role as a local outreach pastor at Pantano Christian Church in Tucson, Arizona. She has a passion for partnering with schools and churches. She believes that when our churches, schools, and communities understand the effects of trauma, it changes how we respond and how we show up for others. That is so true. And when we respond to those around us with compassion and empathy, we help build bridges of connection and healing. Robin and her husband, Roger, have been married for 30 years and have 6 daughters who call them mom and dad, including 4 biological, 1 adopted, and 1 unofficially adopted. They range from ages 17 to 35. So I would say that Robin is definitely versed in being a parenting coach for sure. Life is full with family, grandkids, church, and ministry. She is a certified trainer with the ACES Consortium and a trained independent facilitator of the Love and Logic curriculum. She has a bachelor's in child development and a master's in human resource leadership, and she published her first book in November of 2022. Robin, let's kick this episode off and can we talk about your book for a second? Because I love it. You picked the perfect time to publish this particular book. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you for all of that, Denisha. Oh gosh, I could equally say so much about you. And I just want to say, what a blessing it is to be here and to be able to watch as God leads each of us in these new areas of life, these trajectory changes that grab so many things of our past, so many things that we've been through, and then in this journey together. And I love watching what God is doing in and through you and through Reclaimed Story. So thanks for having me. Yeah. The book, Where in the Zoo Are You, really came about listening to the differences people were having during the pandemic. Right? People who were feeling like, oh, this whole thing's just a joke. And if you had enough faith, it'd be fine. To people who were like, if I go outside, I'm going to get sick and die. Really, it brought to mind how we need to understand each other's perspective. It's really about perspective. So it's written where there's a flood that takes place in the zoo. All the animals have different experiences within the same flood, how the zookeepers come in and how they work together to teach them empathy and compassion. And it's been fun, but really I always wanted to write a book. I had no idea that would be my first book, but really God just put it all together at that time and place.
I love that. And I know your book is a children's book, but I can tell you as an adult, it was very helpful even to me to really understand different perspectives and how different people were responding to the pandemic. But I did read it with our kids, which range anywhere at the time when your book came out, anywhere from 10 to 14 or 10 to 16 at the time. And so, yeah, I thought it was very helpful in a lot of ways. And I think just the overall feeling that you get from the book too is also that we all respond to things in different ways. And so where in culture, where in society do we fall when we respond to things? And I think knowing that your history in trauma informed care, I just think that it's applicable in and out of the pandemic for sure.
And it's interesting how it ties into shame is because when we are sitting there, and if I am judging you for how you react or how you respond, or I'm judging myself, or I'm thinking I'm not having any self-compassion, like, why did I react that way? Why did I respond that way? And it's that judgment, that little bit of almost like a seed of shame that can get planted in us. For a lot of people, right, there's been a lot of traumatic things that's caused that seed. And other times it's just the day-to-day things that I shoulda, woulda, coulda done this. And that seed that gets planted, and when that seed of shame starts, then we lose our identity. And so I think really, I guess I can see how that would connect, but I have just seen how much that has become true for me to understand in the last couple of years, just how all of that ties together.
Let's talk about identity. I love that you brought that up. How does identity play into shame?
I think that when we are reviewing ourselves through this lens of judgment or what we could be or what we should be, or are we viewing ourselves through the lens of who God says we are? And so whether it's the pandemic or whatever's happened to us, I think that if all of us as believers really caught who God created us to be and that freedom that we are seen and known and loved by God, I think it changes everything. But the reality is that, and even if we're not believers, even if we can just know that we are seen and known and loved, for people who maybe don't profess a faith or it's a brand new faith. But I think what happens is it's so easy for us to get distracted by the mistakes that we made or trauma that's been done to us, or even tiny seeds of planting that have come to us. Like for me, I am always feeling shameful over I was born with a lazy eye, which is really in the scope of things so small. But every time when I look like in a mirror or even honestly on a Zoom call, you might have even noticed as we were doing this, I'm playing with my glasses because I don't have my computer glasses and my other ones, I can't see you as clearly. And then I think, oh my gosh, my eyes look so stupid. And then it touches into all those things that as a child or whatever had happened to you. And it so easily distract us. I don't know. Have you read the book, Christine Caine, Unashamed?
Oh, yes. I think we need to add that to our resource list for this month for
gosh.
sure. Great book.
I know. And I think you were I had 5 people tell me in a row and I'm like, okay, God, apparently this is the book you want me to read. But she has this part in here. In fact, I love this. She talks about, she had gone on the wrong train one day. And as she got on the train, she ends up in a whole different place in Australia than she was trying to be. And she was talking about how our brains can do that. Those neurons that fire together, wire together. And it really made me think about these trains of thought. So if I get stuck and I start thinking about how I look or how I respond or the fear that I have or the judge, whatever it is, any of those trains of thought can really take us down this road. And the next thing you know, you're on the shame train and you are ending up at this place that you don't want to be. And it's so hard to get back out of it. And how do we capture those thoughts so that we can change that and say, I am seen and known and loved. I'm not perfect, or I made this mistake, or maybe I don't look how I want to look, but I'm still seen and known and loved. Maybe I don't act how I want to act, but I'm seen and known and loved. And how do we capture those thoughts and put them on the right train of thought so that our brain can begin to rewire so that we don't live in that life of shame? Because when we do, that's when we don't have that identity piece. Right? Our identity becomes something that is not what God intended. And to be honest with you, I see so many people in life and they're like, oh, I wish I could, or I should have, or I wanted to. And I think literally this shame train took them to this place and they didn't either realize or say, you know what, I'm going to get on a different train because I want to be on the identity train, the one that actually speaks truth to my soul.
Oh, I love that visual of getting on the wrong train and getting off at a stop. And you're like, this is not the land I wanted to live in. This isn't where I wanted to be. When you talk about rewiring, this is something actually in the last couple of years, since you have brought me in and opened my eyes to the trauma-informed world, the idea of rewiring. Let's talk a little more about that, because I know I didn't know about that until taking a dive into the world of trauma.
A friend of mine used this analogy about if you go to your friend's house and you need a new cup of sugar because you didn't have enough sugar and you're baking, and you walk and there's a big weeded, like an empty lot between you. And when you walk through an empty lot and the weeds might be up to your knees and you kind of have to muddle your way through, but you did that, right? Now, let's say you needed sugar again tomorrow. And you go and you can probably see where some of those weeds were bent down. So you go again. But let's say you need a cup of sugar every day for 10 years. Eventually, that pathway will get so worn that things will not be growing on it. So it's a worn pathway. When I was hearing that, I thought, oh, this makes sense. That's how our brain works. That's how these neural pathways. I've heard it explained another way, that if you have a river and there's a small offshoot of the river, like a trickle that's coming out from the river, and if the water continues on that little trickle, it will get wider and wider until it becomes its own river. And that's those trains of thought that can start. That's how the neural pathways can start. Maybe I experienced something traumatic as a child, and if it's a one-time thing and I can redirect that, it's different. But what if I get caught in that and say, instead of this man was bad, to all the men I meet are bad, to every man is bad? And our brains can sometimes do that. Think about have you ever seen the ruts to the Oregon Trail? I don't know if you've ever traveled there, but they are like, literally, when you go to see them, whatever, Utah, somewhere on some vacation, we saw them, and they were like 4 feet deep in rock. And I thought, oh my gosh, think about the hundreds of wagons that went through muddy grounds. And it got so firm that if your wagon was in there, you couldn't possibly make a quick left turn anywhere. You're so embedded in that. And when I think about that neurons that fire together, wire together, that's what science has taught us. But that makes the train so much, it makes you understand, why do people keep thinking the way they think when it's maybe either harmful or whatever. And it helps us to not even be shamed in the way we're thinking, because we can understand how it happened. Now we have to figure out, how do we move from that? But instead of saying, oh, I'm so stupid, I keep going back here, it's because your brain has made that pathway and it's so strong. It's hard to change, but it's not impossible to change.
I think that's so encouraging to know that we can change that. We can go to the neighbors to get sugar and decide to go 2 feet to our left instead of going down that beaten path where it's like, oh, this is easy. This is the way I've always walked. This is how I've always thought. That we can just make that switch. And at first, I would assume the first time we walk through that weeded area to get to the neighbor's house, we're going to have to step on some things that might pop us in the face a little bit. We're going to have to stomp down that ground so that we can get over there. And is that the same with thoughts? The more that when we try to take that next path, when we try to create a new path in our minds as we rewire, is that a little bit hard to do at first versus taking the one that we've always taken?
Absolutely. And I think because our brain is doing so many things, right? It's going to take the easier way, because then there's less maybe time, whatever brain time looks like. And think about that. If you're going to your neighbors and your cookies are going to burn, but you ran out of sugar for the next batch, you're like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead on the trail, because you're consciously choosing that. Or if you're not thinking about it, if you were on the phone, I bet you before you realize you would have meandered back to the easier trail.
Yes.
Because that's just the way it goes. So when you think about the predictive brain, think about the things that happen in our life that based on our experiences, our brain either predicts threat or safety. And it takes a long time for our brain to predict something else. So if I have been raised with a lot of shame and I meet a new person and they say something about the way I'm dressed or what I said, if I'm not really careful and if I don't capture that thought, the Bible talks about hold every thought captive. If I don't capture that, my brain is going to say, yep, this is another one of those people who's unsafe, because your brain is quickly categorizing everything so that it can think about whatever new is coming in. So it's that predictive brain really makes a lot of sense when you think about that. And I think all of that together has, for me, helped me when I am talking to someone, when I'm helping someone. And part of me is like, oh my gosh, why in the world would you be making the same bad choice or the same harmful choice or not loving yourself enough to do X, Y, or Z? When I understand this, then I think it gives me more compassion for them. And then I'm not going to add more shame by saying, I can't believe you're doing it again. And that's hard even for me to change that, because my first thought is, why are you doing this again? And I'm like, wait a minute. I have to remember the science behind it, the trauma behind it, what has happened.
Learning that has allowed me to have so much more compassion for myself. When I find myself stuck in that traditional rut, when this happens, this will happen. And I think that has been really good for me to know, like you said, that our brain predicts what's going to happen next based on our past experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And just knowing that's how God made us. And he made us that way to protect us, right? So that we could identify, like you said, threat or safety. And so I think that gives me a lot of compassion for myself when I ask myself, why would you do that again?
And it's hard because I know even if I let's say when you start to think, oh, I've got this under control, like whether, let's say it's public speaking, right? And you're like, I'm starting to feel comfortable. I'm pretty good. People really like me. And then something will happen. And then you will get shame, like, how shameful of me to think that I actually can do this job. So now it's not even shame that, oh, I can't do that, or I'm going to fail at that. But then Satan just has this way of switching it, right? So now you feel shame that you felt good about it. And I think it's such a fine line. And you're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get out of it? And that's where I think it's so important for us to remember the identity that God has given us, and that he has created us, and that we are seen by him and known by him and loved by him. And it's hard to you would think it'd be easy, but it seems hard to remember. And I think one of those things that we just have to continue to capture those thoughts and say, no, God knew that I would make this mistake, or God knew that I would do good. And God knew that I needed to be humble, but he also wants me to be thankful for how he created me to be able to excel in this area.
It's as you're saying that, okay, I'm going to share, you shared a vulnerable moment. I'll share a vulnerable moment here too. Last night, I'm cleaning out this kind of, you know how you have those little spots in your house that you just sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden one day you go, okay, there's no more room to stuff. So I need to go through the stuff that I've stuffed. And so last night I go through there and I find 9 or 10 typed pages of a journal that I'm a big journaler. I love to journal, and not everybody is, and that's totally okay. But I happen to like to journal, and I must not have been wanting to write it out. So I typed it out and then printed it. And it was back from 2007 and 2008.
Oh, wow.
And it's literally me wrestling with God over feeling like he's calling me to get into public speaking, from somebody who sits on the last row at church, slips in really quiet, total introvert. And I am wrestling through this, and you can hear the shame in my journaling.
Oh my
I know
goodness.
It was fascinating. And I thought, if I only knew it, because in 2007 and 8, I used to, when I was at the jewelry store, I would train people, but I'd never been on a stage or a platform, nor had I ever wanted to. Okay.
Oh,
and fast forward 2010, I end up working for our church. And I think it was like 2012. Here I'm an ordained pastor, and I got invited to be on our preaching team. And so this is 5 years before I ever took that leap. And I share this because I read through my journals, and it's intense. Like I shared in there, and I said, I sat at a conference today. This was like, I went through this major conference thing where I was going to conferences constantly. And I said, I sat there in the audience thinking someday I'm going to be up there. And this isn't out of a desire, I want to be on a platform. This really isn't that. I feel God saying, one day I'm going to be up there. And then I had 12 reasons why I'm not qualified, why I should never do that, why I'd be terrible at it. And why, for some reason, I must be in pride, and I must be like, just trying to elevate myself. Like literally, it's this wrestling. And as I read through it, I thought, that's so interesting. I was like ashamed. It was like trying to talk myself out of it before I ever gave God the opportunity to fulfill it.
Oh, I love that. That should be a quote, right?
Yes, so interesting. And as I read it, I thought, it was a part of me. It was like, oh, sweet girl, little did you know that you would be on a preaching team at your church, and then you'd be traveling nationally, public speaking. And never did I want that. And it was pages, and in every entry was some sort of wrestling of either me telling God why I could never do that, why I'd be absolutely terrible at it, and anybody who ever put me up there would regret it, but I feel like God's calling me to do this. And so that's so interesting. It's like I was jumping paths, like, okay, this one feels familiar, I'm going to stand there. But this, I think he's calling me. No, he can't be calling me. Like I was totally doing that. And that was a piece of identity. We can be anybody. Absolutely. That God can call us to do crazy things, even things we're not qualified for. I am living proof of that one.
And the reality is, the more that I have walked in this Christian life, the more I think that when I'm in my better frame of mind, and I think, who am I to be doing X, Y, or Z, or speaking, or whatever it might be. And then sometimes I think that God is like, who are you not to do what I have put in you to do? And the reality is that God brought us sometimes through these times. Like I come to the conclusion that if I looked the way I'd like to look as a speaker, then I wouldn't lean into God. He wouldn't have had to pave that way, right? Because I would think, oh, I look amazing and I can sound amazing. So therefore, I don't really need God. And so I look at that God uses these times to say, I'm going to remind you that it is me that is leading this way, that I am the one who call you out of your identity. right? I think about Gideon. He's one of my favorite characters in the Old Testament in the Bible. And when he talks about, who am I to be used to save save Israel's out of Midian's hand? And God, am I not sending you? It's a rhetorical question. I'm sure. God, what's really your problem here? And he's, Lord, I don't know if you notice, but I'm the least of my clan, and I don't know this, and I don't know that, and I don't know how to fight. And then God has to pare down the army he can take with him. And I think precisely so that Gideon will be able to say, I am able to do this because you said I could do it. If Gideon had said, absolutely, God, you said I can do it. Give me 10 men or 1,000,000 men. It's going to be fine. But no, he just kept dragging his feet. So God, so I'm going to kick you more and more out of your comfort zone so that you can both live in that identity and know that it is I who gave you that identity in that role. And God does that so many times, right? Through Moses and Esther, my Peter. And I think, and every once in a while, I think, and Robin and Denisha, right? Because God's still in that business of helping us to say, Satan wants you to live in this shame, but I have created you for this identity and this purpose.
Amen. And that is applicable, right? We happen to be on this podcast today as two people who are in public speaking, per se. And I know that before, when I would sit in the audience at church, before I was on staff and before I stood in front of that microphone terrified, I remember thinking they have it all together. And so I think it's here we happen to be thrust into this place where we are doing this. But the same thing that you're speaking of, Robin, is I think of when the years when I was a stay-at-home mom. I think of for the years when I had started a business, when I was working as an assistant at church. Like, I think of when I first got married. Who am I to get married? I come from a long line of divorce. Who am I to think I'm going to be married for the rest of my life? Who am I to raise my children? Am I a good enough mom? And I think a lot of people can really relate to those feelings too, depending on where you are in life. And I know that in each of those phases, I have felt like Gideon, and where I have felt like if I had this, I would be better, but God, like I've had to lean into God as a stay-at-home mom, as a wife, as all different places in life has taken me in different seasons. I've had to lean into him. And I love what Gideon says, or what God says to Gideon. Go in the strength you have. And I love that because he was probably like, I don't have a whole lot of strength. And did you not hear all the things I just told you? And now you're taking people away. And what's going on here? But to go in the strength you have. And so, Robin, what would you say to someone who's listening who thinks, yeah, like I have lived outside of an identity that God has for me. I've lived outside of what the Word of God says I am. I've lived outside of a pulling maybe of something that I feel led to do, whether it's be a parent, whether it's take a leap of faith in a particular area or step out and do something a little scary. Sometimes it can be cooking a new recipe. If we're not just that identity of who do we say we are in moments when we tell ourselves we can't, what would you say to someone listening who's felt that way?
Do you remember the game? I'm sure you played it, hide and seek. You think about as that when Adam and Eve in the garden and they had sinned, they had gone against God's will. In this case, they knowingly did it. Sometimes things have happened to us that cause shame to live in us that weren't anything having to do with us, right? There was an abuse or trauma that happened to us. But regardless, we find ourselves in this place where we are hiding. And then when you think, well, there's time when it's your turn, right? If you're playing the game and tag and you get it, but now it's your turn to go and find somebody. And I think sometimes that we get stuck, right? I want to hide, but maybe what would it look like if I seek? What it would look like if I started seeking God and allowed myself to be found in that even. As a kid, you're one or the other, but you can't really hide and seek at the same, because that if I'm going to be hiding, I can't be out there seeking for what God has for me. And so I think we have to decide in that train of thought, are we going to, and it might even be a day to day, it might be an hour to hour or minute to minute. Am I going to hide in this moment, or am I going to seek who God says I am, what God has for me, what God has planned for me? And I think that's so interesting because we'll go through, I think we all go through seasons, right? That I'm hiding right now, or I am afraid to be seen. And I talk to so many women in any points of life, and they're like, I don't have that in me, or because of this abuse or this trauma or this past or my choices, and they get stuck in that hiding. And the thing is, that's where Satan can capture us, because he says, you should stay there. But what if we said, God, I am all yours? It's funny because a lot of times people will say, oh gosh, Robin, I love listening to you speak. And I'm like, I don't know how, like, I don't finish my sentences and I do this and I do that. And they're like, but you're so, and the funny thing is the things that people most like about when I speak is when I share my vulnerability and my mistakes. I was preaching a sermon on Sunday, just this past thing, and I was talking about one thing led to another. I'm talking about my closet on stage and the clothes that fit before the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic, and the few clothes that fit now. And everybody's laughing because we can all relate. I just said it in front of a few thousand people. So the reality is, that piece where you're shamed in terms of like, oh my gosh, what should I wear? And it was a whole crisis. I could only fit into 2 pants. So which ones do I wear? And my daughter's like, well, I certainly wouldn't wear either of those. And I'm like, she's here, try these pants on. I'm like, they don't fit. No, keep trying. No, clearly I am not going to lose 4 inches overnight. So the reality is though, that when we are ourselves, more people typically are attracted to us. And think about the God who created us, who knows every cell in our body. And isn't he more attracted to who we are just in the midst of everything than anything else? But Satan just whispers, if only you were, or it's not enough, or they will judge, or no one can relate. And it's so easy to lean into that because it goes along with that fear inside of us. But I just have been recently thinking about that. Am I going to hide or am I going to seek? And anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the visual that's come to my mind lately.
It so does. And when I think of hiding, I think of the isolation that comes with that. And as you said, that's when the enemy can come in and really do some damage and pull us even deeper into isolation. But when where healing and vulnerability comes out is in community, is with other people.
A visual came to my mind when I was reading Christine Keen's book. I forget what she was talking about, but I thought about if I'm a person and I'm carrying a lot of baggage, right? I got a backpack and I've got suitcases and I don't want anyone to see this. So I'm just going to throw a shawl over me. Right. And you walk down, you can totally see that I'm carrying all this stuff, right? You don't know what I'm carrying, but it's clear that I'm a little more bumpy than I might usually be. And the reality is we feel like no one can really see this, but they can see that something isn't quite there. And if I walk in front of a mirror and if I take that shawl off myself, I can maybe face and say, you know what, I'm carrying baggage that I don't need to carry anymore. That God said, let me carry that for you. And you're like, I'm going to hide it under the shawl. It's like, you know how like a kid and you're like, clearly we can all see that you got 4 suitcases under there. But then you're like, oh no, now they're going to judge me. And it's like almost you're inviting that because you're keeping it hidden. And it's just like this cycle. And I'm like, why wouldn't we just say, I'm taking all the shot, I'm putting the suitcase down and I am just going to go run free. And yet, oh gosh, we don't. And so many times you're like, but that's what we want. That's the desires of our heart. So how do we get to that place? It takes a lot of work, I think, but it's so worth it. It's so rewarding.
When you said just now, I take that backpack off, I take those off and I can run free. I could physically feel my shoulders coming down. When your words just saying that, I was like, oh, that's relieving. Even just the word picture of that, because we carry the baggage of all the things, so many different, we could name our bags. They have so many different names, right? Exactly, all the stuff we stuff inside. But sometimes we don't know the weight that we're carrying until we feel the weight of its release. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's so much freedom in that to face it, seek what the Lord has to say about that, find some trusted community to hang out in and have a safe place to process. Boy, that's our heart, is to provide women with that safe place to be able to unpack those bags and say, look, there's this. Am I still okay? If that's, and where another woman goes, I got that, my bad too. Look, and we can come and have that safe place to be vulnerable. I just love everything that you shared. And you have a huge heart, Robin, for equipping people who help others. And so before we go today, would you tell us a little bit about Reclaiming Hope that's coming up here in Tucson? You have to be in Tucson. So I'm so sorry. This year is not virtual. But if you're in Tucson, tell us a little bit about this conference.
I will. And then don't let me forget, because I want to close with a quote by Curt Thompson.
Yes.
Who wrote the book, The Soul of Shame. So that way we'll get back to something really deep with that at the end as people walk away. But the Reclaiming Hope Conference, this will be our 4th time doing it. We are super excited. It's going to be live and it'll be hosted at Pantano Christian Church. You can Google the information, but we will have keynote speakers. We'll have breakouts and we're covering all kinds of things like If you think about, say, everything from addiction, what happens in addiction and the stigma and the shame that goes with that keeps some of those cycles going. We'll talk about resilience. We'll talk about self-care. We have sessions on working with trauma-informed discipleship. Like, how do we as people who help others, whether we're from the faith community, educators, social services, first responders, if we want to help others, we need to have some tools. Like, our love is the biggest thing, that connected relationship. But if I can have some tools and some knowledge and some understanding, it changes the lens I use and it changes how I interact with you. So many times I will tell people, the more that I have learned about trauma and how it shapes the lives of the people around me, I think it better helps me to show up for them in their life, and better helps me even in my own life to be more self-compassionate. And self-compassion really starts with me. If I'm going to be compassionate for you, I have to be compassionate with myself. And that's hard. If you're a perfectionist like me, I'm like, oh, I'll worry about myself later. But the reality is, if I'm judging myself, there's parts of me that are judging you too. And that's something that I've had to learn in the last few years. So I hope people will come. It's a one-day time. You'll get to choose the sessions and the breakouts, have a lot of community resources. And Denisha's going to be there sharing an amazing topic on what to say and what not to say when people are going through hard times. And I tell you, if I had taken your session, I would have saved a lot of heartache. I know in my own times in life, and when I've said things to people, just not understanding and not knowing. And I would rather have not be my age now and learning these things. It would have been so much more helpful to myself and those around me if I had learned that when I was in my younger years.
Oh, so many things for me if I'd learned before.
I know,
Yeah,
right?
this conference, it's so great. When I first went, the very first year, I did it so that I could learn more about me. So I went to every class, even though it's about being helpers, right? Whether you're working at a church, a teacher, foster parent, a first responder, it's in that capacity of how do you serve others? But I went the first year personally to figure out, how do I serve my kids? How do I serve people that I interact with? And if you approach it with that lens, I really think it's applicable to everyone who has an interest in trauma-informed knowledge. And then if you're in the helping capacity, I just think it is just so relevant for today. So I appreciate you hosting that. And if you guys want to sign up for that, do it soon. There's definitely an early bird special there, but it's pantano.church/reclaiming hope.
And you know what's interesting is, I just think that we all either have been through trauma or we know someone who's been through trauma. Yeah, everybody has a story. And even if somebody's like, well, I don't really know what my story is or how that relates, there's somebody close to us within that sphere of our family or our couple neighbors or coworkers. There is hurt that is out there, and we want to be part of the healing. We want to be part of helping people to feel that they're not alone. This power of presence. One of the things Curt Thompson says is that where we talk about how we want to be so deeply known that shame has no place to hide. So you think about what God says in his word, right? Where there is light, there can be no darkness. And I think that the more we understand some of these things, the more we can show up. And then I'm going to close my part with Curt Thompson. He says that in shame's healing, we become recommissioned to do and make the things we were created by God to do and make. And I love that, because I just think that Satan has, he's just really kidnapped, so to speak, our identity, and he's tied it up. And when we can get back there, when we can just lay that shame aside and be healed from it, think of the amazing things that are in us that can be released because we feel the freedom to live how God has called us to live.
So good. I love that. Robin, I absolutely love you and love having you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your vulnerability with all of the listeners today. So thank you.
Thank you for all you do. And thanks for having me. You are amazing. And I'm one of your number one followers. So go, Denisha.
Go, Robin. Go team. Go team.
Go team. Go team.
Yes. We hope that you found hope and some encouragement in today's episode as we conclude our month talking about the topic of shame. And we will see you same time, same place next week. Thanks for listening. I pray you found hope in today's conversation and maybe even feel a little less alone in your story. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram at Reclaimed Story. Want to learn more about living a reclaimed life and how you can be a part of our growing community of reclaimers? Check out our website at reclaimedstory.com. All of those links and more will be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this inspirational podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Not only will you be the first one to know when new content comes out, but it is also a huge help in helping us reach more people to live the reclaimed life.